Carl Jung once said that life really begins at 40. Up until then, you are just doing research. It is a striking line because, at first, it sounds almost dismissive of the first 4 decades of existence, as if youth, ambition, and the restless years of building one's identity are nothing but preparation for something that comes later. But Jung was not undermining the vitality of youth. He was pointing to a deeper truth. The first part of life is largely lived under the shadow of other people's expectations, while the second half, if lived with courage, can finally become our own. In our 20s, we live outwardly. We strive to be what our parents, our culture, our peers, and even our own ego want us to be. We build careers, chase status, seek love, and try to plant ourselves firmly in the world. Jung saw this as the natural task of early life, the morning of existence. But like all mornings, it is not meant to last forever. A new sun eventually rises, and with it, a different responsibility. By the time a person approaches their 40s, Jung noticed a profound shift. The strategies that once gave meaning, ambition, conquest, proving oneself, begin to lose their power. What emerges instead is a strange restlessness, sometimes even a sense of emptiness. This is the so-called midlife crisis that modern culture often laughs about, but Jung took it with utmost seriousness. To him, this crisis was not a breakdown but a calling, a signal that the second half of life requires a new orientation, a deeper and more honest relationship with the self. It is here, in this turning, that life as an authentic journey truly begins. When I think about this, I imagine speaking to my younger self, the version of me in his 20s and 30s who thought the world was something to conquer rather than to understand. I would tell him, the storms of youth are necessary, but do not mistake them for the whole ocean. Life is not merely about climbing ladders or chasing dreams. Those pursuits will teach you lessons, but the meaning you seek will not be found there. It waits in the quieter, often overlooked places, in reflection, in self-acceptance, in coming to terms with the shadows you once tried to outrun. Jung believed that by the age of 40, the unconscious begins to press forward with greater urgency. The parts of ourselves we neglected, our fears, our vulnerabilities, our unrealized potential, demand to be heard. If we ignore them, they return as symptoms, dissatisfaction, anxiety, a sense that no achievement quite satisfies. But if we listen, something extraordinary can happen. The second half of life becomes a time of integration, where we begin to reconcile who we pretended to be with who we truly are. This, I think, is the essence of Jung's advice. The midpoint of life is not a decline but a chance for rebirth. It is the moment when we can finally turn away from the masks we wore and begin to live without disguise. To my younger self, I would say, do not fear aging. Do not cling desperately to the fire of youth. For what comes after is not less but more. The fire changes form. It becomes steadier, warmer, able to illuminate the depths of the soul rather than just the surface of the world. Philosophy often reminds us that life is a series of seasons, each with its own necessity. To be young is to sow, to scatter seeds into the soil of possibility. But to reach midlife is to harvest. And the harvest is not material wealth or status. It is wisdom. It is the ability to finally live in alignment with your deeper nature, to recognize that success is not how the world measures you, but how truly you embody your own essence. When Jung said that life begins at 40, he was speaking from the heart of his psychology. He saw that many of his patients who approached that age were not suffering from external problems alone. They were suffering from a deeper hunger of the soul. They had lived in service of what he called the persona, the mask worn for society. But once the mask began to crack, there was an opportunity. Beneath the fragments, a raw face waited to be seen. And so, the advice I would give my younger self is this: do not live so frantically that you forget there will be a second chapter. Do not mistake the urgency of youth for permanence. The work you do now, every mistake, every triumph, every disappointment, is research. And when the time comes, when you reach that midpoint, you will not be starting over. You will finally be ready to begin. The strange thing about youth is that it convinces you of permanence. In your 20s, you think the energy will last forever, that opportunities are endless, and that every mistake can be undone by sheer willpower. In your 30s, you may even believe you are still at the beginning, still proving something to the world, still running on the momentum. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, a shift takes place. The body begins to whisper its limits. Relationships reveal their patterns. Achievements that once felt like peaks begin to feel strangely hollow. Carl Jung described this turning point as the natural curve of life. Just as the sun climbs until noon and then begins its descent, the human soul moves from expansion to contraction, from seeking outward to turning inward. The first half of life is about establishing ourselves. The second half, if we are brave, is about understanding ourselves. And it is here, at the threshold of 40, that we are given the most important choice: to cling to the illusions of youth or to step into the unknown territory of genuine maturity. When I think of my younger self, I remember the restlessness, the desire to impress, to stand out, to grasp at everything that glittered. I realize now that I would tell him something very different than what he wanted to hear. I would tell him that the real treasures of life are not found in constant striving. They are discovered in depth, not breadth. 1,000 shallow experiences cannot equal the richness of one moment lived fully, without disguise. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole. It is not about becoming perfect, nor about living up to the ideals of others. It is about drawing together the fragments of who you are, the strengths you claim proudly and the weaknesses you try to bury, and weaving them into something true. The midlife years are when this task presses upon us most urgently because the old strategies no longer work. You cannot forever live only by ambition, by youth's hunger for achievement. At some point, the deeper self demands to be recognized. But this recognition is not easy. It asks us to face the shadow, the parts of ourselves we denied, repressed, or projected onto others. In youth, the shadow is easy to avoid. There is always another distraction, another goal, another relationship to chase. By 40, those distractions lose their force. The shadow stands at the door and waits. If you ignore it, you carry the weight of emptiness. If you face it, you step into a new kind of freedom. To my younger self, I would say, do not fear this confrontation. Do not waste years running from what you already carry inside. Every disappointment, every insecurity, every secret resentment, they are not there to destroy you. They are guides pointing toward the parts of you that need to be made whole. What you resist will remain your enemy. What you embrace will become your strength. This is why Jung considered the midlife crisis not a curse but an initiation. It is the initiation into the second half of life, a stage not defined by youthful conquest but by soulful depth. If you accept the invitation, the rewards are profound, a peace that is not dependent on external validation, a sense of purpose that does not fade when the applause dies down, and a relationship with yourself that is rooted in honesty rather than illusion. So if I could send a message back across time, I would whisper to my younger self, do not be afraid of what is coming. Do not cling to the fading light of youth, as if it were the only fire you will ever know. A brighter, steadier light waits for you, one that does not burn wildly but warms everything it touches. Life does not end at 40. It begins. Because only then are you strong enough, humble enough, and wise enough to finally live it as your own. There is a paradox in midlife that Jung understood with unusual clarity. The very things that once gave you strength can begin to hold you back. The drive to succeed, the discipline to push through, the desire to win admiration, these qualities are powerful in youth. But if clung to too tightly, they become chains. What carried you forward in the first half of life can quietly imprison you in the second. To my younger self, I would say this: learn to loosen your grip. You believe now that control is the answer, that if you plan carefully enough, work hard enough, and prove yourself often enough, the world will finally reward you with lasting security. But life will not bend to control. It will bend only to presence, to awareness, to the willingness to meet reality as it is rather than as you demand it to be. Jung saw that the second half of life requires a kind of surrender, but not the surrender of defeat. It is the surrender of illusion, the illusion that we can forever stay young, the illusion that our worth lies in the roles we play, the illusion that happiness is always just one more achievement away. When those illusions dissolve, What remains is not emptiness but truth. And truth, though it may frighten us at first, is the ground on which real freedom is built. This is why many people experience restlessness at midlife. They sense that the ladder they have been climbing is leaning against the wrong wall. They have reached heights they once dreamed of, only to find that the view is not what they hoped. Jung would remind us that this is not failure. It is awakening. It is the signal that it is time to descend, to find a new path, and to walk it with the wisdom of all you have already endured. I imagine speaking to my younger self in one of those sleepless nights, when the mind races with ambition and fear, calculating every move as if life were a chessboard. I would tell him, the game you are playing now matters less than you think. What matters more is the kind of person you are becoming while you play it. One day, the pieces will scatter, the board will be cleared, and none of the victories will mean as much as the character you built in the process. Do not be so consumed with winning that you forget how to live. At 40, life asks you to redefine victory. No longer is it measured in applause or wealth or recognition. Victory becomes the ability to sit with yourself in silence and feel at peace. Victory is the strength to love others without needing to possess them. Victory is the courage to forgive the past and to walk into the unknown with open hands rather than clenched fists. This is the gift of the second half of life. It teaches you that wholeness matters more than achievement, that depth matters more than speed, and that authenticity matters more than approval. It teaches you that aging is not the slow erosion of meaning, but the discovery of a deeper meaning than youth could ever imagine. And so, to my younger self I would say, stop rushing. Stop fearing that you are running out of time. You are not running out, you are preparing. Everything you are living through now is material for the person you are becoming. And when the day comes that you turn 40, you will not be stepping into decline. You will be stepping into truth. What makes the midlife passage so powerful is that it strips away illusions we thought were permanent. In youth, we believe we are defined by our job, our accomplishments, and the way others see us. But around 40, life begins to dismantle that mask piece by piece. It is not cruelty, it is mercy. Because without this stripping away, we would never meet the person we truly are. Jung understood this process as the path toward individuation, the slow and often painful alignment of the inner self with the outer life. Until midlife, most people live in service of what he called the persona, the carefully polished face we show to the world. But the persona is not the whole truth. It is a survival strategy, a role, a necessary mask. At some point, the soul can no longer tolerate the distance between who we are inside and who we pretend to be outside. That distance becomes suffering. It becomes the quiet despair of feeling that no achievement is enough, that no recognition fills the emptiness. And so, the work of midlife is integration, to gather the broken, neglected, and unwanted parts and finally welcome them home. This is why Jung often spoke of the shadow with such seriousness. The shadow is not a monster lurking in the dark, it is the part of you that has been exiled, waiting for acceptance. Only when you have the courage to embrace it can you step into the second half of life with authenticity. If I were speaking to my younger self, I would tell him, do not be afraid of imperfection. Do not waste energy trying to appear flawless. You will never win that battle, and even if you did, the victory would be hollow. What matters is not perfection but wholeness. To be whole is to hold together the light and the dark, the triumphs and the failures, the strength and the fragility. To be whole is to no longer hide from yourself. This is the wisdom that comes only with time. Youth wants to shine, maturity wants to endure. Youth wants applause, maturity wants truth. Youth wants to conquer the world, maturity wants to reconcile with the soul. By 40, if you are willing to listen, you realize that the race you were running was never against others. It was always a race toward yourself. There is a gentleness that can arise in this stage of life, a compassion for yourself and for others. You begin to see that everyone is carrying wounds, that everyone is wrestling with shadows. Instead of judging, you understand. Instead of competing, you connect. This is one of the quiet miracles of midlife. The heart grows softer even as the mind grows sharper. You become less interested in proving and more interested in being. To my younger self, I would say, Do not fear the coming of years. Do not see 40 as an ending, but as an opening. It is the moment when life invites you to stop performing and start living. It is the moment when you can finally breathe, no longer chasing every horizon, but standing firmly on the ground of your own being. That is where freedom begins, not in endless striving, but in simple truth. When Carl Jung said that life begins at 40, he was not promising ease. He was pointing toward a threshold. To cross it requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to face everything you once turned away from. But if you can walk through it, what you find on the other side is not decline, not loss, but a new beginning, one richer, deeper, and far more human than anything that came before. I would tell my younger self that the first half of life is necessary. The struggles, the mistakes, the chasing after recognition, all of it is part of the research, as Jung called it. Those years are the training ground, the preparation, the shaping of raw material. But you must understand, they are not the whole story. They are the prologue. And if you cling to them as if they were the entire book, you will miss the chapters that matter most. By 40, you begin to see that life is not about accumulation. It is about distillation. You no longer need to prove yourself endlessly to others. What you need is to gather the essence of your experience and live it with clarity. Every scar becomes a lesson, every failure becomes a teacher, every shadow becomes a guide. This is what Jung meant when he said the second half of life is about individuation, the slow, patient work of becoming the person you were meant to be all along. The advice I would give my younger self is this: learn to listen earlier. Listen to the silence between your thoughts. Listen to the body when it tells you to rest. Listen to the heart when it longs for authenticity over applause. Do not drown these signals in noise, distraction, or ambition. They are the compass that will guide you when the outward map no longer makes sense. Another truth that midlife reveals is that time is finite. Youth moves as if life will last forever. But 40 brings a quiet recognition: the road ahead is shorter than the road already traveled. Some people fear this. They see only limitation. But Jung believed it was the beginning of real freedom. Because when you realize that time is finite, you finally stop wasting it. You stop living for the approval of others. You stop chasing every empty promise. You begin to ask what truly matters, and you begin to live with urgency, not for achievement, but for meaning. This awareness of mortality is not a curse, it is a gift. It sharpens life, like a sculptor chiseling away what is unnecessary. At 40, you realize that every day is too precious to be lived in pretense. You cannot afford to keep wearing masks. You cannot afford to ignore the voice of your soul. And so, the second half of life becomes the time not for expansion outward, but for descent inward, into truth, into wisdom, into love. I would tell my younger self, do not mistake this descent for decline. Our culture teaches us to fear aging, to cling desperately to youth as if it were the only stage of life worth having. But this is blindness. The second half of life is not about losing vitality, it is about gaining depth. You may not run as fast, but you will see more clearly. You may not be as restless, but you will be more grounded. The fire of youth is bright and wild, but the fire of maturity is steady and enduring. And in the end, it is the steady fire that warms the soul. There is also a deeper compassion that awakens here. You begin to forgive yourself for the mistakes of youth. You begin to forgive others too, because you finally see how fragile and conflicted everyone truly is. The harsh judgments of youth give way to understanding. You see that we are all struggling, all carrying shadows, all searching for meaning. And in that recognition, you learn to love more fully, not in the desperate, consuming way of youth, but in a way that allows freedom, for yourself and for others. And perhaps this is the greatest secret that Jung offers us about midlife. It is not about becoming someone new. It is about finally becoming yourself. It is about dropping the roles, the performances, the borrowed identities, and standing with the quiet dignity of authenticity. This is where peace is found. Not in constant striving, but in arriving at your own life, after years of wandering. So if I could send one final message back to my younger self, it would be this: be patient. Do not fear the years to come. Do not believe the lie that life peaks in youth. Life ripens. Life deepens. Life becomes real only when you are ready to live it without disguise. Everything you are rushing through now is preparing you for that moment. When you reach it, do not resist. Step into it with courage. Because that is when life begins, not at the frantic height of ambition, but at the quiet center of truth. That is when you will know that your story was never about climbing higher and higher, but about returning to yourself, whole and unbroken. That is the gift of midlife. That is the beginning Jung was speaking of. And when you stand there, no longer afraid of time, no longer at war with yourself, you will understand that nothing was wasted. Every struggle, every detour, every mask you once wore, they were all part of the path that led you here. The path to becoming yourself. The path to life's true beginning.